Welcome, everybody, to another episode of Strife's Sanctum podcast. My name is Citizen Strife, and this week I'm going to be diving back into the Xeno series. And this is actually going to be the first instance of playing something from the Xeno franchise. Because I did not play Xenogears first. I played this one first. That being Xenosaga Episode 1, The Wille Macht, otherwise known as the Will to Power. The Wille Macht is going off the tagline of works from Friedrich Nietzsche, and that will come into play somewhat in how this game presents itself, and how I would say it's remembered. In a way, I would say when discussing what it does well and what it doesn't do well. But the first thing I will mention is, as I've stated, this is my first instance of the Xeno franchise. It wasn't Xenoblade, it wasn't Xenogears. It was this one. My brother tipped me off to a game that was coming out at the time, early 2003, late 2004, because he kind of knew that at the time I was heavily invested in JRPGs, and he'd just heard rumors that this thing was coming out, didn't know what it was other than an RPG, and said, hey, that might be something you'd go for, give it a shot. And I played it, and to this day, I would still put this as my favorite Xeno game ever. I've played Xenogears 1, well, Xenogears, and really wasn't all that big a fan. Maybe it had something to do with the fact it was late PS1, like early PS1, mid PS1 era. Maybe it was the fact it didn't hit what I was going for, or it didn't flesh itself out completely. I'm not saying Xenosaga 1 did, but again, Xenosaga, Xenoblade, Xenogears have this thing, and it might have something to do with the creator. We'll start there. Tetsuya Takahashi was part of the Squaresoft team in the early days. I watch randomizers all the time, and I see names like Tetsuya Nomura back in the Final Fantasy IV development team. He was part of that as well. He was part of the Final Fantasy V development team, Takahashi was. So he was tasked with creating Xenogears. And while it still has this aura around it as this amazing can't-miss RPG, I played it after the fact and was not as engrossed by it. Part of that had to do with the fact that I'm coming off of Xenosaga, which is obviously going to have a bigger budget, a higher scope. So again, I'm not as wowed by it. I think if I had played it when it happened, I would have a different opinion on it. But I don't want to talk about Xenogears all that much. I don't want to talk about Xenoblade all that much when I'm trying to get into Xenosaga, but you can understand where I'm coming from, where, to me, this is my introduction to Xeno. This is where my frame of reference is going to lie. These three games in the PS2 era. So I'm going to compare what I've seen since and what I've seen before to what Xenosaga was. And what Xenosaga was very self-serious. There were some dopey parts to it, but it doesn't really stoke the anime cliches as much as you would think it would, which is a good thing, despite it basically being a space opera anime in a video game form. I will say that much. But looking back on it now, there's no way in hell I'm going to be able to talk about all three games at once, but I'll make allusions to them as I go. But this is one of those franchises that held my interest in the PS2 era. In fact, this was probably the definitive one, because Final Fantasy really had 10 and 10-2. Persona came at the tail end with 3 and 4. You had good games like .heck.GU, but really, as far as fully fleshed out series go, Xenosaga was kind of the thing that I remembered that time in my life about. Playing that first one, being engrossed in it, understanding it had some issues with it, really hating 2, I'm not gonna lie, most people do, though it has slowly gotten some fanfare. That being said, 1 and 3 are the one people remember. That being said, Xenosaga, given that we're getting a lot of information about Super Mario RPG getting a remake that has been confirmed, Chrono Trigger potentially getting a remake, this is kind of that, like, why haven't you done this? Why hasn't Namco done this one yet? Which is weird, because Xenoblade has gotten a lot of publicity and basically staked its claim as a standard for the franchise, for the genre now, that you would think people would want to, chomp at the bit to play Xenosaga again after 20 years. That has not happened. And now that Final Fantasy VII Remake has happened, Chrono Trigger is probably going to get a remake, though not really a sequel. That's probably the new break of glass. This is that remake that may never happen. Those 3 games in a trilogy on a freaking platform like Metal Gear. Metal Gear Solid got a fucking remaster, and you telling me Xenosaga can't? No. Is it the million-selling, spanning thing that everybody's going to buy? No. But I bet your ass there are going to be people that are going to want to relive this story, as good as it was with its weird foibles as a franchise, because there is a lot of love and creative effect here. It's not going to be everybody's cup of tea, and I will stress that right up front. This is not a franchise even for most RPG fans. This is not a franchise for, like, Persona fans or whatever. This is a specific, like, it is its own thing. I don't even know if people playing Xenoblade would go for this, unless you're a Xeno fanatic and want to experience it. Because I watched and played Xenoblade games after this and kept comparing, that inherent comparison bullshit. They were going in a different direction with Xenoblade than I was familiar with Xenosaga. It took me like halfway through Xenoblade 2 to really get the super serious, oh, okay, it's the same people doing this one. Okay, I get it now. But there are moments, right? But Xenosaga, for its part, is still very memorable. Sometimes for the good reasons, sometimes for the bad. But Xeno as a franchise is ultimately a creative vision of somebody who has endless ideas and almost never has enough budget to go around. Maybe that's changed now that Xenoblade 2, Xenoblade X, and 3 have gotten, like, a lot of publicity. They've probably given him enough budget to finally finish his games. But I remember, like, those first few games that Takahashi was making, they couldn't buy any extra stuff. They had to cut stuff. Xenosaga was meant to be 6 games. The first one sold 1 million copies. Not too shabby, but not the, oh my god, we're gonna go with it. I think now if he did this, they would have given him the rope and the money to do it. But they had to turn it into 3 games. So what did they do with the first game to set them up for the second and third? Well, they tried a few things, but there are definitely some good, and there's definitely some bad things that stuck with the franchise going forward. But we'll get into that. And I will go, sometimes I go character first. This time I will have to go plot first. So I will do the plots and characters together because it would make the most sense. But our main character is Shion Uzuki. And she's voiced by Leah Sargent, who was R. Dorothy, Wainwright in Big O, and Millie from Trigun. So, again, I don't know if I'd watched them before I saw this. I'm pretty sure I played this before seeing those, and it was just like, oh, I know who she is. But Shion is atypical of a protagonist. 1, she's a female, so bear that in mind. 2, at least for the initial couple of games, she's not superpowered at all. She's just a engineer, just kind of antsy, she has a face where she's like super nice and super helpful, but goddamn does she have an attitude. She has a temper. She will call people out on bullshit. She will be like the overworked full-timer who's just like, I'm sick of this shit, and kind of down on her luck, but that like things throughout the game kind of exist in this like weird ass like something bigger than me's happening, but I'm also bigger than this franchise is letting on. I do think they go a little bit overboard in 3, and honestly, they forget about her in 2, almost to a fault. But again, those are those games to be discussed. But anyway, Shion is part of Vector Industries. The idea is they're on a military ship known as the Woglinde. They're tasked with creating this crazy, super powerful android known as Cosmos. Think female Terminator, think Aegis from Persona 3, but even more so. Cosmos is like the mascot of the entire Xeno franchise for good reason. Because when she came out, there was nothing like her. She was just stupidly overpowered to the not even like gameplay. The gameplay wise, they geared her to be normal, right? But in character, in universe, this is like the be all end all thing. She is going to destroy everything. She could destroy everything, and she had done so. The backstory of this situation is that Shion and several other people tried to make her the first time. It went rogue and destroyed people bad, and so they're very antsy about Cosmos waking up. So they go through these tests, and Cosmos is, very matter of fact. That's the weird thing about Cosmos and her portrayal. Bridget Hoffman, who was in Chobits, .hack GU, and other stuff at the time, just plays her really deadpan. And it's good because you get this unnerving sense that it's like, she's going to fucking murder people. Like, that's what she's designed for. Exactly why she's there. She's to combat these alien life forms known as Gnosis. So the idea is Shion is supposed to keep her from flying off the handle and killing things. And if she wakes up, people and things are going to die. And that's exactly what ends up happening. The Gnosis attack the Woglinde ship. People get fucking dead, and Cosmos wakes up, and the wake up scene for Cosmos is like a chilling thing, even for like early PS2. Like, this was 2003, so early mid PS2 era. It's just the sight of this dark ass room and this super bright lady android with red killer eyes waking up and saying, I'm gonna fucking murder things, and then she does. The best part of that early sequence, it takes a little bit of time to build up, is that she just blows the shit up. They get attacked. They steal this thing known as the Zohar emulator. The idea is that there are these, like, I don't know what you would call them, teleportation devices, energy sources. They're this weird magical MacGuffin that has this, like, mystical, just insane power that can do lots of crazy shit. So the Gnosis were after that. Other people were after it, but the Gnosis took it. So that was one part of the storyline. So they end up going there. Shion and Cosmos and their friend Alan, who's just this scrub who has the hots for her. It's basically a Shion is like out of his league and he knows it, but everybody teases him. So his whole arc is, I like Shion, but I'm a fucking scrub. So whatever can you do? But Shion finds her way onto a different ship, and because Cosmos commandeers the ship because of course she fucking can. So they switch to 3 different arcs in this story, because again, they're trying to build a big narrative, and then everybody kind of coalesces into a party. So you got your couple of characters here, and then as that's going on, there's a separate mission, an infiltration mission in a place called the UTIC organization. So this offshoot governmental agency is trying to find this character known as Momo. And Momo stands for Multiple Observative Mimetic Organism, or Organicus. Hooray, thank you Wikipedia for coming with that. I know her as Momo Mizrahi. She's voiced in this game by Sherry Lynn. Unfortunately, she got changed out, which is another of Xenosaga's problems, but I'll get to that when I talk about Xenosaga 2 someday. But Momo is just a nice girl, but she's a Realian. The idea is that they're synthetic, not quite androids. They're synthetic humanoid beings, but Momo is special. They go into a lot of her backstory in the second game, but the idea is that she has a lot of information that is going to help or hurt the world, and she's being held captive by the UTIC organization. So these guys in the government just find this guy known as Ziggurat 8, voiced by Richard Epcar. And Ziggy's whole thing is he's a big cyborg. He's got this like gigantic like scythe thing on his arm. You know, he just punches dudes. He's basically like 70% cybernetic, and like the rest of him is kind of like flesh over the top of him. He has this kind of like, I just want to die. I just want to be legally dead. I don't want to remember my life. They go into it a little bit in Xenosaga 3. Mostly, I do know there was a side game that talks about it before Xenosaga 2 and 3 do, but that one was a bit smaller scale than these 3 mainline games. But he's kind of an assassin for hire. He goes in there, finds the girl, they hit it off as, you know, kind of a father-daughter sort of thing, and they try to escape, but the unfortunate thing for them is the leader of the UTIC organization, known as Margulis, voiced by Michael McConaughey, is just this imposing samurai dude. He does not take kindly to bullshit. One of the early things I enjoyed, other than Cosmos wrecking shit, was knowing that you had to fight this Margulis guy. It was one of those, you can lose it, but you can also win it. And if you're good enough and lucky enough to win these fights, it's pretty good. Because Margulis' whole thing is he is a villain through and through, but he just does not give a shit. He has people he answers to, but that's not really open until 2 and 3. But as far as a main, I would say he's a main villain, though there's another guy that shows up a little later that really takes that mantle for the franchise. But Margulis is always there as the, you people are stupid, I know what is right, and I'm going to find this Realian, foist her off on this other guy I know, because that's my role, but you're not going to stop me. So all these people with weird ass guns and shit, and here he is as a samurai just wrecking face with one fucking sword, because he can set it on fire, he can set it like on he can imbue it with electricity and basically wreck your shit in a boss fight. And I'm like, okay, I like this guy. He's imposing, he's impressive, I need that. It's great because he's got some characters along the ride with him, and he's again, Ziggy escapes with Momo, but Margulis is going to keep chasing him. All in the while, there's a character kind of in the background that is there going to become a threat. The person who wants Momo even more. But the UTIC organization thing happens, then another set of characters happens. So it's kind of like bouncing back and forth between the Shion stuff, the Margulis, and the Ziggy and Momo stuff, and then the set of third characters. So before we get to the third characters, the UTIC organization goes after Momo and Ziggy. They end up going towards the Elsa because lo and behold, all of that shit happens, and it's crazy shit happens and whatever. They fight them off. Then they get to a third set of characters led by Junior. And Junior is voiced by Brienne Seidel. Let's see. She was Tsukasa in Dot Hack Sign. I know I've mentioned Dot Hack Sign before. If you haven't seen it, it's a fucking amazing show. Dot Hack G is also really good. But anyway, Junior, like, I don't know. It's one of those things where because he's sort of a teenager, but not quite a teenager, but sort of is, but sort of isn't. Like, like, I don't know. It's like I don't like him as much as I should. as much as the game forces you to like him, and specifically too, like, he has a good backstory, but because he's this sort of like gunslinger, I'm having fun with my life, that sort of like, it gets annoying. It reminds me kind of like Irvin from Final Fantasy VIII, where you would think he's better than he actually is, but he's kind of a dope, and it's not for a while. And I just don't like, if it's between him and Shion, I would rather learn more about Shion and her life than anything else. Junior just gets a bulk of storyline, especially in 1 and 2, that is just like, whatever. But alongside the rest of them, rounds out the characters, is Chaos, voiced by Derek Stephen Prince. He was in a lot of other stuff. He was one of the main villains in Persona 3. He was the Revolver Jesus guy. I don't even know his name. I just know him as Revolver Jesus. People play Persona 3 know what I'm talking about. Anyway, so Chaos's whole thing is he's sort of, not really, God, sort of. How would I describe it? An angel, a god. An angel, a god. Like, he lets on that he's sort of important, but he doesn't really want to be noticed as important, so he's kind of in the background. So shit happens. Anyway, so those three parties meet up by weird shenanigans, and things keep coalescing, and they keep going into these dungeons. They find that Zohar in this gigantic fucking gnosis. Think Monstro from Pinocchio, but in an alien ship kind of way. While that's going on, there's a side story with another character who was on the Woglinde, a character known as Cherenkov, who was voiced by Paul St. Peter. And so Cherenkov is kind of browbeating Shion and Cosmos. He even points a gun at Cosmos at one point, like, that's gonna fucking work. Oh, hey, I've got a gun. I can shoot it. I can shoot a military grade and basically secret lab android. No. But he's got these like weird flashbacks and shit. And the closer they get to the cathedral ship, the sooner like his stuff happens. He's like a test subject for this like personality reconditioning program, and he's like constantly getting in trouble. So he's basically Margulis's mole in the military organization. So his task is to find the Zohar, give it back to Margulis, find the Realian, give them back to Margulis. He doesn't really succeed because he's kind of like fucked up in the head. He kills these dudes in this like alleyway somewhere, and then goes on the cathedral ship, and you start seeing these like flashbacks of shit that goes wrong. Like, he was there during the first set of stuff with Cosmos when she went fucking apeshit. So he knows. And that's why he's trying to kill Cosmos, though it obviously didn't fucking work. They had to use like a bazooka or some shit to actually get rid of her. But anyway, he ends up becoming a boss and passing away because I guess he was infected by Gnosis. His manifestation of his fears and all that shit come into play, and he just basically goes fucking apeshit on the party. He ends up dying, and then they go to a different go through a different set of circumstances. There's like a mission where they get framed, but they have to kind of dive into the past to uncover footage that was not doctored, because the UTIC organization says, hey, we have footage of you attacking the Woglinde, and try and prove us wrong. Nope. So they have to go into the past via like this crazy mind thing known as the Encephalon. It's basically like a virtual boy if it was like a VR sim kind of thing. We have the Oculus Rift, and I'm going back to Virtual Boy. This is where my mind is going. Anyway, so they do that. They find out that Shion's past is sort of in and out, so they weave in Shion's past. Her parents die. Then they veer into Momo's past and Junior's past a little bit. So the idea is that everybody's past's kind of a mixed jumble and a mixed bag, so the game is kind of telling you, this is something we're going to focus on. Because they don't want to focus on it too much right away, but they get the information they need. They reactivate Cosmos and shit happens. What ends up happening is UTIC organization gets Momo back, and then they launched this like crazy dungeon thing called the Song of Nephilim. So the way they do it is that this crazy ass like triangle looking thing, basically a spaceship in the sky or whatever, causes this like crazy amount of gnosis and destroys everything. They have this like crazy song that makes the gnosis go nuts, makes other people go nuts, and it causes a panic. Amidst that panic, Momo, in her stupid whatever, tries to help people by herself, knowing she's a public, she's basically wanted, right? And all of a sudden, she gets kidnapped by the character that everybody's going to remember from this game, Albedo. And Albedo is voiced by Crispin Freeman, so you can obviously tell that I'm going to gush about Crispin Freeman and his acting great. But this is the time to get into it better than anything else. So the idea is Albedo's fucked in the head 6 ways from Sunday. And he has a scene. Again, I've kind of been spoiling, but I'll put the spoiler tag at the beginning of the everybody will know there'll be spoilers in it. But anyway, this was a scene that was shortened and censored in the American version. So what ends up happening is Momo gets kidnapped and sent to the Song of Nephilim, and she wanders in and she finds herself in a room with a bunch of characters that are basically replicas of her. She was a prototype Realian. Albedo's been kind of mind fucking them, literally, sort of. It's disturbing. But essentially, it is an older man mind raping people who look like kids. Yeah, that's basically what this is. This entire sequence. And Albedo just is Kefka on steroids. He's not trying to destroy the world. He's actually got something else in Xenosaga 2 that he's got in mind, and his story arc ends in 2, pretty much. But suffice to say, he needs Momo as a key. But he's got his own reasons, and he's just kind of digging into her subconscious and reveling in it. But not just that. The thing that got censored in the footage was not the whole like mind raping shit. It was he has this ability where he can rip off his own head. He can shoot his own head. He can destroy it. He can rip off hands. He can just blow shit up. So Momo tries to fight back, obviously, but Albedo just avoids the damage. He just can regenerate. He can regenerate basically his entire body at will. And he rips off his own head. The English version said, nah, we don't want that. No, this is a teen-rated game. Let's not show the dude ripping off his own head. And of course, Crispin Freeman, in his own Crispin Freeman way, goes fucking nuts with it. And again, I'm sure the Japanese actor does the same. But again, I went with the English version, of course I did. But that is a chilling ass scene, and Albedo is the thing most people will remember from Xenosaga for good reason, whether that's good or bad. I'm making it sound way worse than it is, but I'm having to be matter-of-fact about it. He mind fucks a kid who looks like she's 12 to 14. She's technically 14. Don't ask me. It is a teen-rated game. I know the subtext. It is wrong. Albedo is wrong, and most of it is just to piss off Junior, because you know what? They know each other. And the party finds Momo and Albedo in the room, and Albedo's searching for the data inside of Momo in a disturbing way. Junior shoots off his head, shoots off his arm, doesn't matter. He regenerates all of them, and he fights them. And then he fights them again later. He summons this thing known as Proto Merkaba. And for this game, the final boss is them in this big, like, space station-y kind of thing. They fight off Albedo, and they fight off this final boss. And then they basically get, like, you know those like space movies where the engines break and they're basically fucking dead? Well, Cosmos and Chaos both help and steer the ship against all the fire and the destruction down into the planet, and they start the second game on the second Miltia. So the game sort of ends. And I knew going in that it was going to be a long-term franchise. I was kind of hopeful we'd get the entire story of Xenosaga, but I do understand why it only lasted the 3 games it did. But as far as a first game, like, again, there's a lot of stuff to like in these games. I personally like Shion and Cosmos, Ziggy, Albedo and Margulis. Junior, Momo, Chaos is fine. But again, this game is a lot of stuff going for it, good and bad, and the retelling the plot can only do so much justice because there's so much going on. And that's before even talking about the battle system, because the battle system takes cues from Xenogears, but also does its own thing with it. It's a turn-based battle system. The idea is that you have triangle and square buttons for different combinations, and then you can use a circle button if you have, I believe it's AP stocked up. You need 6 to do a special move, but you can also set, like, if you get enough skill points and set things to a short mechanic, you can do like triangle circle or triangle, whatever, triangle X, and little things like that, and you build your chain, guard, get to 6 AP and do things. But you kind of have to fiddle with that mechanic because you have different specials that have different elemental affinities, or you have people that use magic, otherwise in this game known as ether skills. So Shion, for instance, is a healer. Momo is a healer, but Chaos can also do that. Ziggy's a fire user. He's got some electric skills, but he's mostly a physical user. So you've got your powerhouses, you've got your spellcasters, and you've got your healers, in a slightly different mechanic than a normal class-based system. And you can gear them, at least in the first game, to do different things based on their skill trees. So you got tech points, spell points, mobility, ability points, what have you, in these skill trees, and you're working around. Do you want to keep Shion as a healer, or do you want to focus more on her attack damage? And you can avoid focusing on some of the later skills and just buff up early level skills. I remember one of my favorite skills was Spell Ray. It was early game stuff, and I was like, no, I'm buffing the shit out of this, and I'd be doing 1,000 damage or something crazy like that near the end there, because I just kept buffing the same skills over and over. So the early skills can still hold you up for the rest of the game if you wanted to just build those rather than keep unlocking new shit. So every character is viable. There are some occasions where you separate the party, but by and large you have your 6 characters and you can fiddle around with them however you like, especially near the end. They also have these eggs units where they're basically giant mechs that have guns and swords on them. The biggest problem with those is you have to take a turn to turn the eggs units. You have to make the eggs units viable in the first place. You got to give them weapons and armor too. But then when you use them, they have their own turns. They have their own skills, and some of them are better than others. Like giant eggs units are gonna, be very hardy, and you're gonna need to use the eggs to fight them. But if your character dies inside the eggs units, they're done. It's not like, oh, they'll go back to their old selves. Nope, they just die in the fucking cockpit. It's kind of an annoying mechanic, which I think they kind of fix a little bit later, and they just make the battles inside the units their own thing, and they streamline it a little bit more, especially in 3. But yeah, in 1 it's a bit clunky. One of the main interesting things about the first game is this rotating bonus wheel, and alongside the getting the AP, I'm using AP for skill points or whatever. It's these 6 little dots, right? Use those dots to do the thing. While you're doing that, you have these boost mechanics. So you're doing skills, you're healing party members, you're boosting attacks. Every so often, a member of the opposing party and you can also like cut a turn. You can just like press boost and just be like, I'm going next. So it's not the same way as Final Fantasy X where you're using a skill and you go faster. It's I've built up a boost, I'm using the boost, and I'm getting first dibs. The reason you do this is you can check a rotating list of like 3 to 4 different things. There's a spot that says nothing, so nothing changes. There's one that I believe increases damage or spell damage. There's one that increases the amount of buffs you get at the end of, like, the spoils you get, like EXP, tech points, and whatnot at the end of battle. That's the one I always shoot for. So if you defeat an enemy, you get upwards of 2, 4, or even 10 times the boost in your spoils at the end of the battle. Or once you do an attack, you gain a higher boost. So you kind of finagle with the turns as best you can to fit what you're going for. So that's why boost is important. You can pile on the damage, or you can guard again, or you can heal. Little things you can do. It's not as thorough a system as Final Fantasy X was, because Final Fantasy X was all about changing the turn order to fit your needs, and then the enemies would do the same. This is a little bit of a combo system meets Final Fantasy X turn order shenanigans kind of system, and I think it works. I don't know if the other games in the franchise do as much. I think 2 did, but I don't recall 3 sticking with that rotating wheel, or if they did, they streamlined the system a little bit more. They had, like, each game had their own separate mechanics, so neither game felt the same, so bear that in mind. As far as aesthetics and design, this is an anime space opera. If you're a Star Trek guy, you're into Star Trek, this is the game for you. And it's very bright and very colorful. The issue I find is it's very stiff. There is a lot of, there's a little bit of humor, but it's not meant to be a humorous game, for better or for worse. You're kind of at the mercy of how the game wants to proceed. It is a game for sitting down and watching a story. And later on in the game, a lot of the dungeons are very, very, very long. I talked before in Persona about the Persona loop. In this game specifically, this game has its own loop, where most of the time you're in for an hour of cutscenes. And if you don't like anime style, you're probably not going to like this. This looks like an anime. This feels like an anime. If you're not into anime, it's not like cliche ridden most of the time. It's Star Trek stuff and visuals and, spaceships and warp drives and, weird technical mumbo jumbo meets anime. And specifically Neon Genesis Evangelion, because this game suffers the same way Neon Genesis Evangelion did. Eva focused so heavily on the angels and the biblical references of, apocalypse that they forgot it's just some dudes and some mechs doing shit. Eva is just people, specifically teenagers, blowing shit up. And they talk about like Shinji has all these like, who are you and what are you actually doing? What is your reason for existence? The philosophical bullshit. No, that is not Eva. It's never been Eva, and I think it gets a bad rap because it's trying to be way bigger themes than it is. I get the daddy issues part, but no. The reason I bring that up is Xenosaga does the same thing. It uses biblical references like the arcs and ships of the arcs and, gods and biblical references to locations and all that junk. They even named the Zohar emulators after the apostles. Some reason, this game is drowning in biblical subtext, and it means nothing. Like, again, if you're a religious person, that's great. This game is doing it for no other purpose than because it can. I think it's trying way too hard to turn everything into a biblical reference when it does not have to. It's people in space doing space stuff. You've got space Jesus, you've got space devil, you got space robot lady, you've got space overworked programmer lady, you got cyborgs, you got androids. You don't need gods and witches and devils and demons and testaments and all this shit. It makes no sense. So when the game doesn't focus on the biblical references, it's fine. The fact is, they focus on the biblical references as if it means something. It's there for flavor. As if they didn't understand the idea that they were going for. Even if they did. Even if they did, does it make a difference? The answer is no. So, if you haven't played Xenosaga, get ready for a bunch of biblical references. If you read the Bible and believe it, and that is your thing, you may get a kick out of it. I'm coming from the perspective of a person that I'm just trying to play my space opera game with space opera people and androids blowing shit up. What does a god have to do with any of this? What do apostles have to do with people 4,000 years in the future? What does Jesus Christ himself have to do with these giant floating, weird crosses made of, orange and red and stuff that do time travel and other weird junk? Nothing. It means nothing. And I do think that Xenosaga on the whole would have benefited from not. Take these characters at face value for what they're doing. Sure, Margulis's whole thing, he's a freaking religious fanatic. I'm okay with that to a point. If he's a religious fanatic and he believes in all this shit, that's fine. But that's where most of the problem comes in, is because he is a religious fanatic and he is spouting all this gibberish about the Bible and no, this is 6,000 years after that stuff. It makes no fucking sense. So, yeah, no. Scratch all that. Watch it for the pretty anime girls and the people blowing shit up. No. Watch it for the crazy dude who does all the crazy shit near the end of the game and blows off his own head and rips it off and then regenerates. No, it's fine. It's a serviceable game that does its own good thing there. But getting back to the story, it's space opera stuff. If you like space opera stuff and you don't mind all the biblical references and whatever, you'll be fine. I didn't want to talk about the music yet because I wanted to save it for this section. I talked about the Eva approach. I talked about long cutscenes and how you'd spend an hour sometimes waiting. Xenosaga gives you character dump. It is story dump. Think personas like intros all the time. You are watching the show. When you're not watching the show about the space opera and the space androids, you're playing the game. But you're playing the game for an hour, 2 hours. Some of these dungeons in the first game are long. I mean, maybe not so much the early game, but man, when they get going, like I'd say Cathedral Ship, it is long. And one of the main issues I have is until near the end of the game, a lot of these dungeons and a lot of these towns have no music. Yasunori Mitsuda did a great job with the soundtrack. There's some cool stuff in there. Like, the final boss theme is great. The fight with Margulis is good. The opening scene with Cosmos waking up on the Woglinde is pretty good. And a lot of the stuff is cool, but for whatever reason, whether he ran out of material or they didn't focus on it, like, When you're walking around the Woglinde or the Kukai Foundation or lots of places, even some of the dungeons, you're doing it without music. It not even the same. Like Final Fantasy would reuse music tracks. This didn't have music tracks for the majority of the game. The ones that are there are fine, except for the fact that when you're fighting bosses, they use the same theme. The only time the music in the boss theme changes, the music theme changes, is the final boss. So it's got a like weird Final Fantasy 1 vibe to it, where there's not enough music going around, especially for a game of this caliber from guys who've done this for like 10 or 15 years. It seemed like they didn't have enough music to go around or just forgot to make music, in most cases. So it's unnerving. It's an unnerving experience. The songs that are there are fun, but when you're dealing with dungeons that take hours to do with a lot of random encounters, it gets exhausting. These dungeons can be exhausting. So again, where is the fun? Well, the fun is in the visual style, because this is probably one of the best looking PS2 games I've ever seen, and your mileage may vary. 2 and 3 went for a more realistic but still kind of anime-fied aesthetic. This is pure brightness. Like, they went for a specific like anime-ish style, but they blew all of their budget in making it look impressive. For a 2003 game, this is like early PS3, like late PS3 looking. Like, maybe not in battle. Like, in battle, you can definitely see kind of like rough edges here and there because it's still kind of mid PS2. But I'll be damned, it was high level stuff. And again, some people may vary on their tolerance for the big eyes, the anime look, all the colors. I think it looks amazing. The character models look amazing. Everything is just big, bright, and colorful. It looks and feels like a PS3 title in early PS2 era. That's probably why the budget died. I wouldn't doubt it, because they spent a lot on making the cutscenes look great. But again, it's not everybody's cup of tea. I would say Margulis and Albedo as main villains. Specifically Albedo, but I like Margulis as a counter, because I've said this with Kefka too. There comes a tolerance for that type of like insane for the sake of being insane, and the character, like the voice actor and whatever are reveling in it, and the dialogue is reveling in it. There's a tolerance level for that, and sometimes Albedo can just, not as much as Kefka does, I think, because of Kefka's notoriety. Albedo is that like next level of what Kefka could be if he was voice acted. Kefka did get voice acting for the Dissidia games, but imagine if they do remake that's what I feel Kefka would sound like. But at the same time, Albedo's got his own motivations. They go a lot further with it than Kefka does. It's very awkward and disturbing, as I've said. They don't pull punches even for a team game, but Albedo is an engaging character and has his motivations, but I also think it has a lot to do with the performance still being a bit more subdued and grounded despite being an absolute crazy person. But I give props for Margulis being this stabilizing, just straightforward, those Organization 13, Zemnis types that are just like, I don't have time for your bullshit. I'm going to ruin your life, and I don't really care what you think. That sneering, dominating presence that is very like cloying and just rips at you. And it helps that he's there, because if Albedo was the guy that you were chasing the entire game, as opposed to like the last third of it, I think it would be annoying. but Albedo's there enough. Margulis is there for the beginning of the game to give you that stable, this guy's a bad guy. You give him some sequences. You give him like an idea of what this character is. This evil Pope dude with like standards, that doesn't tolerate people failing him. And then you counterbalance that with Albedo's absolute insanity. You got a couple of good main villain characters that are really, really striking. And I think, honestly, Shion as a main character. Shion is not your typical main character. And I know that Cosmos has the notoriety as like the character on the box art, but Shion is the main driving force of the narrative. So that whenever they switch to like Ziggy or Junior, I'm like, I like them, but I don't. I know it's kind of a split narrative and a sort of ensemble, but the first game is Shion's game. The second game is Junior's game. The third one is Shion's game. I kind of wish Shion was the main character and main driving force of all three, but I get why they kind of bounced around the way they did. Shion doesn't need to have the entire game about her. She can be like the Tidus, where when she needs to be important, the game will give her a reason to be important, but I kind of like the fact that she's not this bumbling random protagonist who everybody likes. I kind of like that she's a bit of a bristly, annoying bitch some of the time, because she has a sense of who Cosmos is and she doesn't want to be told that she doesn't know. But at the same time, it's like, is Cosmos exactly her creation, or is Cosmos going to do her own thing? So there's that dichotomy of what is Shion capable of and what is she in over her head, and the game expresses that. Some of the best lines are when they get kidnapped and captured, and it's like, I just handed out government secrets, or I just handed company secrets over to the government. I am so fired. Or she just wants to take a break. She just wants to rest. But then she gets moments where she's very nice and very humble and tries to help people. And then she even gets, early on, she even gets into a spouting match with this guy who's like a military guy and is like, you treat these people like humans? You think they're like us? You were fucking stupid. And they get into this kind of like, culture spat about, people should have rights. And it's very like, slave oriented, whatever, and the idea is that she's being called out on her bullshit. So she's trying to justify her, being nice to these, like, essentially these slave beings. And then the other guy calling him out on her bullshit. So the game is willing to paint Shion in this kind of, she's nice, but she's standing up for herself when she has to. She can self-defend. She can defend for herself. Her weapon is like this crazy laser beam, weapon smacking thing, but she can do martial arts too. She learned martial arts at a young age, so she can defend herself. They give you like little bits and pieces of her backstory so that she as a character doesn't stray away from this, I am the protagonist that has been bound by the game to be the all-powerful, all-knowing, all-seeing character. No, that's what 3 does to her. But for that initial game, and most of 2, she's just some person got caught up in this crazy-ass drama. And I like that. Because unlike the protagonists who are meek and unwilling, she's not meek. She's just in over her head. But she's not trying to steal the scenery either. She's just a random person, got caught up in a mess that is not of her doing, and she's pissed off about it. And she's willing to be pissed off at her superiors and her friends and call them out on her bullshit, but also defend herself when necessary, but understanding that she's not the standoffish prick either. She's that tsundere prick like 30% of the time, but the rest of the time she's just a normal person that you can understand would be caught in that desperate situation. So that crazy annoying bullshit doesn't come off as crazy annoying bullshit. She comes off as a normal, organic person who's just like the overworked secretary at her job, and I've always appreciated that, especially from a game that has so many things going on with it, that your main character is not only a female main character, but somebody that I think older people who've, worked in jobs that are just like, I'm not appreciated. I'm trying to just live my life. That sort of vibe, that sort of groundedness is actually refreshing because she's not this do-it-all, will mean everything, chosen by God, that sort of thing. It's refreshing that she's just a person. She's intelligent. She's overworked. She's underappreciated, and she's pissed off. And in 3, she takes it out on everybody else. And they change the game around it, and it's kind of... But for the first game, it's a nice, interesting look at a character that I think really doesn't get the credit that she deserves for being like that linchpin of that first game, because there's so many other things that go on around her that I think, she doesn't get the credit as a main character that I think she deserves, right? And... that was something I wanted to express because some people like Shion, some people don't. I'm like, I really liked her as a main character. But as far as Xenosaga proper, this is a game and a franchise that I think gets lost because Namco doesn't want to re-release it, doesn't want to port it, doesn't want to remaster it, doesn't want to do shit with it, which is a shame. So it gets lost into the fringes of time, especially since Xenogears gets all the credit for starting it. Xenoblade gets all the credit for popularizing it. Xenosaga just kind of exists in this, like, the people who loved it, but understand it's got some problems and it's not the critical or commercial success that the other two were. And it's a shame, especially that first game, which had such high potential. I don't think the second one lived up. No, it did not. They changed way too much. But the third one is really good. The first and third Xenosaga games are some of the best RPGs I've ever played. And it's a shame that I don't think we're ever going to get that remaster that I think it deserves. Much like Breath of Fire, I think this franchise deserves to be given a modern lens and given some notoriety in a much more public, much more streamer friendly, content creator friendly environment, because this came out before that was a thing. That came out before Twitch was a thing. I know internet was a thing still, but I don't think it got the notoriety that this franchise definitely deserves. So if you're into space opera anime bullshit, this is probably the best interpretation of that from a video game perspective. Star Ocean kind of goes up and down. Xenosaga is very, very self-serious. Tales can do the space opera bullshit, but is still very grounded in the, medieval times, stuff. Xenosaga is space. So if you want a video game and an RPG that is space opera, this is probably the best you're going to get. But that'll do it for this week. And let's see what I've got up for going forward. So let me load my thing because loading things are fun. And let's see, because next week we get back into anime. And there we go. So next week we do RWBY Volume 9. So anime-ish, I guess. But like I said, I think RWBY is really good, and I think that now that we're getting into single volume reviews, it's going to be a little bit easier to review them. Volume 9 was certainly a new type of thing for the franchise to try, and I think they succeeded. July 23rd will be the 2-year podcast anniversary, which, again, I will be focusing on my past year and reflecting on it, but also reflecting on kind of my top 3 and bottom 3 playthroughs on my main channel. And then the next game in the docket will be Bravely Default. Speaking of Final Fantasy-ish things, it's got its own vibe to it, and it's good in its own way, but it's also bad in its own way. So I'm willing to look at games at face value, and hopefully this thing, we're creeping up on that second, finishing up that second year. People have been liking, or if you dislike these reviews, please let me know. But I do have a ton of reviews to go. I'm chock full of things, and the cool thing is, with stuff like Final Fantasy 16 coming out, Loop 8 coming out, whether that's good or bad, there are games coming out that I can add to my list, and it's going to be fun. But that will do it for this week, and I'll see you guys next time. Citizen Strife, signing off.